Clara Whitcomb slammed the carriage door behind her, with both hands shaking, and tears she refused to let fall burning behind her eyes. She did not look back. She could not. Not with Lord Thorne's voice still ringing in her ears, not with the memory of his hand closing around her wrist in the middle of a crowded ballroom, while every man and woman in Boston looked the other way. She had run. A gentlewoman of 22 had gathered her skirts and run, and she had gotten into the wrong carriage entirely. If you've ever felt cornered in a room full of people who should have helped you subscribe, stay until the very end and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The carriage lurched forward before Clara could breathe. She pressed herself into the far corner of the seat, heart hammering against her ribs, and it was only then, only when the wheels began rolling over cobblestone and the golden light of the Harrington ballroom disappeared behind velvet curtains, that she realized the seat across from her was not empty. A woman sat there, poised, calm, watching her with dark eyes that held not 1 ounce of alarm. She was perhaps 25, dressed in deep green silk that cost more than Clara's family had spent on food in 3 months. Her dark hair was pinned without a single strand out of place. And she was smiling not the polite, practiced smile of a Boston socialite, but something sharper. Something that said she had already decided something and was simply waiting for Clara to catch up. "Well," the woman said, "you took longer than I expected." Clara stared at her. "I beg your pardon. To run." The woman tilted her head. "Lord Thorne grabbed your wrist at 9:30. It is now nearly 10. I was beginning to wonder if you'd simply faint and let him win." The carriage hit a rut, and Clara grabbed the door handle to steady herself. This is not my carriage." "No," the woman agreed. "It is mine." "Then I need to stop. I have to get out." "You absolutely do not." The woman's voice was pleasant, but immovable, the way a river is pleasant until you try to walk against it. "Lord Thorne is standing on the front steps of the Harrington house right now, looking for a woman in a pale blue dress. If you step out of this carriage within the next quarter mile, he will find you before you take 6 steps. Clara went still. "I suggest," the woman continued, smoothing her gloves as though they were discussing the weather, "that you sit down, catch your breath, and allow me to introduce myself. My name is Eleanor Bellamy, and I have been watching you navigate that ballroom for 2 hours with very great interest." Clara sat down. She did not entirely mean to, but her legs made the decision without consulting the rest of her. "Clara Whitcomb," she said, because it seemed the only sane response. "I know who you are." Eleanor looked at her steadily. "Your father lost Whitcomb Hall in January. The creditors came in February. By March, half of Boston had stopped inviting your mother to supper, and by April, Lord Thorne had begun telling people that the Whitcomb name was salvageable, provided the eldest daughter made the right choice." Every word landed like a stone dropped in still water. Clara felt the ripples move through her chest. "You've been thorough," Clara said, and she was proud that her voice came out level. "I have," Eleanor said simply. "It is a habit I find useful." She paused. "Lord Thorne has been pursuing you for 4 months. You have declined him twice in writing and once in person. Tonight he made his intentions felt in front of 60 witnesses, and not one of them intervened." "No," Clara said, "they did not. And yet here you are, upright, moving, getting yourself out." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "Miss Whitcomb, I did not invite you into this carriage by accident." Clara looked at her. Really looked. "You staged this. I left my carriage at the east entrance instead of the north. I made certain my driver was visible from the terrace where you were standing when Thorne approached you. I cannot make you run, but I can make sure that when you do, there is somewhere to run to." Eleanor sat back. "I staged the possibility. You made the choice." Outside, Boston moved past in summer darkness, warm and close, the smell of the harbor cutting through the heat. "Why?" Clara asked. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because I have a brother." Nathaniel Whitaker was by every measurable account a difficult man to like. This was not Eleanor's opinion. Eleanor adored her brother with a ferocity that had alarmed their mother since childhood. But she was not blind, and she was not sentimental, and she had watched Nathaniel for 29 years with the particular clarity of someone who loved a person without excusing them. He was brilliant. He managed the Whitaker estate in the Hudson Valley with an efficiency that bordered on obsession, had tripled its revenue in 6 years, and could hold a conversation about architectural preservation or colonial land law that would leave most men speechless. He read voraciously. He gave generously quietly, without announcement. He had 3 years ago sat at the bedside of a tenant farmer's dying wife for 4 consecutive nights because no one else would. He had also, at 26, married a woman named Catherine Aldridge because her family had land that adjoined his and because it seemed the sensible thing to do. Catherine had been perfectly pleasant. Nathaniel had been perfectly dutiful. They had been perfectly miserable together in a way that neither of them had ever said aloud. And when Catherine died of fever, 18 months into the marriage, Nathaniel had grieved with a guilt that Clara, had she known him, then might have recognized as worse than grief. He had not remarried. He had not, as far as Eleanor could observe, allowed himself to want to. He comes to Boston twice a year for the Preservation Society Symposium, Eleanor told Clara as the carriage turned north toward Beacon Hill. He arrives, he attends the lectures, he speaks to the necessary people, and he leaves. He has done this for 4 years. He does not dance. He does not dine out. He answers every attempt at personal conversation with a politeness so thorough, it is practically a wall. He sounds exhausting, Clara said. He is, Eleanor agreed. He is also the best man I have ever known, which is a very inconvenient thing to have to tell someone. She looked at Clara with that steady, measuring gaze. The symposium is in 3 days. Nathaniel arrives tomorrow. And I have spent the last 6 weeks trying to identify a woman in this city who is intelligent enough to hold his attention, honest enough to earn his trust, and stubborn enough not to be discouraged when he is difficult. Clara was beginning to understand. The understanding sat in her stomach like cold water. Miss Bellamy. Eleanor. Eleanor. Clara kept her voice careful. I am not in a position to whatever you are proposing. I am not, my family's situation is not. I am not proposing a transaction, Eleanor said, and her voice had a sudden edge to it. I am not Lord Thorne. I am not offering you a rescue in exchange for performance. I am telling you that my brother is going to be in Boston in 3 days, and that he is lonely in a way he doesn't understand yet, and that you are one of the most quietly remarkable women I have watched in a very long time, and I thought you deserved to know that someone noticed. The carriage slowed. They had stopped in front of a neat brownstone on a quiet street, not the grandest address in Boston, but solid, respectable. This is the boarding house where my cousin Mary keeps rooms, Eleanor said. It is safe, it is clean, and Lord Thorne does not know of its existence. You may stay tonight at no obligation whatsoever. She opened the carriage door herself and looked back at Clara. Tomorrow, if you choose, you can walk away, and I will never trouble you again. Or you can come to the Preservation Society reception Thursday evening, as my guest, and meet my brother, and see what happens when 2 intelligent people are simply allowed to talk to each other. Clara sat in the half-dark of the carriage and looked at the hand Eleanor held out to her. Everything she had been taught told her this was reckless, that you did not accept charity from strangers, that you did not walk into schemes with women you'd met 40 minutes ago in a moving carriage, that a woman in her situation could not afford one more mistake. But Lord Thorne's hand had been on her wrist tonight, and 60 people had looked away, and Clara Whitcomb had never in her 22 years believed that the only power she had was the power to endure. She took Eleanor's hand. Tell me about him, she said. Tell me everything. Eleanor told her everything, not all at once, not in the carriage, and not that night, but over the following 2 days in Mary's quiet parlor over tea. That was better than anything Clara's family had been able to afford in months. Eleanor talked about Nathaniel Whitaker, the way someone talks about a landscape they have loved for a long time, with honesty about its difficult terrain and without any apology for it. He had been 12 when their father died. He had stepped into the role of man of the family with a seriousness that had impressed everyone around him, and that Eleanor suspected had cost him something she didn't have a word for yet. He trusted numbers more than people, not because he was cold, but because numbers had never told him one thing in daylight and another in the dark. He had a particular way of going still when something interested him, a slight forward lean, a slowing of breath that Eleanor called his listening posture, and that she had seen precisely twice in a ballroom context and approximately 10,000 times in front of a library shelf. "He will not be charmed," Eleanor said on the second afternoon, watching Clara read through a pamphlet from the Preservation Society that she had quietly provided. "Charm makes him suspicious. He has been charmed by the wrong people too many times." "I wasn't planning to charm him," Clara said without looking up. "Good. What were you planning?" Clara set the pamphlet down. "To be honest, to be curious, to ask real questions and give real answers, and see if there's a person under all that politeness worth knowing." Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "Yes, I thought so." The Boston Preservation Society held its summer reception at Faneuil Hall, which was exactly the kind of venue that made Nathaniel Whitaker comfortable, old, purposeful, built to last. He arrived at 6 in the evening with his hat under his arm, and his mind already on the architectural survey he intended to review before Thursday's lecture. Eleanor was supposed to meet him at the door. Eleanor was not at the door. What was at the door was a woman in a pale gold dress, standing with her back to the entrance, reading the historical placard on the east wall, with an attention that most people reserved for personal correspondence. Nathaniel stopped. He had seen women read placards before. He had seen it done as performance, the cultivated interest, the tilted head, meant to be observed. This was not that. This woman had her weight shifted slightly to her left, one hand braced against the wall near the placard, reading the way you read when you've forgotten there are other people in the room. He almost walked past her. That was the honest truth of it. He almost simply walked past and went to find Eleanor and let the moment be what it was, which was nothing. He did not walk past. "The date on that placard is wrong," he said. She turned. Not startled she'd heard him approach, but with a composure that shifted into something genuinely curious. "Is it?" she said. "The original hall was completed in 1742, not 1743. The discrepancy comes from a transcription error in the 1798 city records. It's been on that placard for 11 years, and no one's corrected it." She looked at the placard. Then she looked back at him. "Have you told them?" "3 times, he said. "In writing. Twice to the society directly." The corner of her mouth moved. "And yet there it sits." "And yet there it sits." She looked at him with those steady gray eyes and said, "Nathaniel Whitaker, your sister described your listening posture to me in considerable detail. She said I would know it when I saw it." He went very still. "She also said," the woman continued, and her voice was careful now with an honesty in it that landed differently than he expected, "that she arranged for us to be here tonight, that she has been engineering the possibility of this conversation for some time. I thought you should know that before we went any further, because I am not. I cannot be in a conversation under false pretenses. I'm sorry. I know that is a strange way to begin." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. "Your name," he said, "Clara Whitcomb. And you are telling me this voluntarily, before I could discover it any other way?" "Yes." "Why?" Clara held his gaze steadily. "Because Eleanor told me you trust honesty more than almost anything else. And because I have had enough of people performing things at me to last a considerable lifetime. And because—" She paused, and something flickered in her expression that was neither calculation nor performance, but something rawer than both. "Because if this conversation is going to matter, it ought to start the way it means to go on." Nathaniel Whitaker stood in the doorway of Faneuil Hall on a warm Thursday evening in the summer of 1815 and looked at Clara Whitcomb with the specific attention he usually reserved for things that mattered. "Miss Whitcomb," he said at last, "tell me what the placard should say." And she did. And he listened. They talked for 47 minutes before Eleanor found them. Clara knew because she counted not deliberately, but the way you count without meaning to when something is happening that you want to hold on to. 47 minutes in which Nathaniel Whitaker did not once look past her shoulder at someone more important, did not once shift his weight toward the door, did not produce a single one of the practiced gracious exits she had watched men deploy at parties her entire life. He asked her about the hall. She told him what she'd read. He corrected 2 things she'd gotten slightly wrong, and did it without condescension, the way you correct someone, when you assume they want to know the truth, rather than be flattered. She asked him about the Hudson Valley estate. He talked about the Eastern Foundation wall with a specificity that should have been tedious, and was somehow not because he talked about old buildings, the way some men talked about horses, with a reverence that revealed something true about who they were underneath the manners. Then he said, "You mentioned Eleanor described my listening posture to you. What else did she tell you?" Clara considered the question. She could soften it. She could deflect. She had been trained as all women of her class had been trained to navigate this kind of moment with grace that cost nothing and revealed nothing. She didn't. "She told me you married at 26 for practical reasons, and that it made both of you unhappy, and that you have spent 3 years since Catherine died punishing yourself for something that wasn't entirely your fault." She paused. She didn't say it in those words, but that's what she meant. Nathaniel went very still. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "That was accurate," he said. She stopped. It was accurate. His voice was even, but something had shifted behind his eyes. "I'm not certain whether to be grateful or alarmed that Eleanor said that to a woman she met 4 days ago. She said it because she loves you," Clara said, "and because she wanted me to understand that if you were difficult, it wasn't malice. It was accumulated caution." Accumulated caution. He repeated the phrase slowly. "That is a generous interpretation. I tend toward generous interpretations when I think they're warranted." She met his eyes. "I reserve ungenerous ones for men who grab women's wrists in front of 60 witnesses." The reference landed. She watched him absorb it, the slight tightening at the corner of his mouth, the recognition that she was not speaking hypothetically. "Lord Thorne," he said. "You know him. I know of him. We were at the same dinner in New York last year. He spoke about his tenants the way some men speak about livestock." Nathaniel's voice was flat, but the flatness had texture. "Did he hurt you?" "Not in any way I couldn't walk away from," Clara said. This time. The 2 words hung between them. This time. She hadn't meant to add them. They had come out on their own, which meant they were true, which meant she was standing in Faneuil Hall, telling a man she'd known, for less than an hour, more than she'd told her own mother in 3 months. Nathaniel looked at her steadily. "How long has this been going on?" 4 months, since my father's debts became public." She kept her voice level. "He believes the Whitcomb name is recoverable through him. He has said this to several people. He considers it generosity." "It is predation," Nathaniel said. Something loosened in Clara's chest. Something she hadn't fully realized was clenched. "Yes," she said, "it is." That was the moment Eleanor chose to appear. She materialized out of the crowd the way Eleanor always materialized, as though she had been there all along, and the rest of the room had simply failed to notice her. She looked at her brother, and at Clara, and at the particular quality of silence between them, and the satisfaction that crossed her face was so swift and so unguarded that it was almost endearing. "Nathaniel," she said warmly, "I see you found the only other person in this room who noticed the placard was wrong." "You told her about the placard," Nathaniel said. Not an accusation, almost amused. "I mentioned it in passing." Eleanor linked her arm through Clara's with the ease of a woman who had decided a friendship existed and saw no reason to wait for permission. "I mentioned a great many things in passing. Are you angry?" Nathaniel looked at his sister for a long moment. "No," he said, and sounded slightly surprised by the answer. Eleanor smiled like she'd won something. Clara suspected she had. The reception lasted another 2 hours. Nathaniel stayed for all of it. This, was Eleanor informed Clara, in a whispered aside near the refreshment table, unprecedented. He had not stayed the full duration of a social event in 4 years. She said it with the quiet triumph of a general watching a battle turn. And Clara would have found it more amusing if she hadn't been so aware of Nathaniel 3 feet away, talking to a colleague about preservation funding, occasionally glancing over with that still attentive look that she was beginning to understand was simply how he was, that it wasn't performance, wasn't strategy. He looked at things he was interested in. He happened to be interested in her. The weight of that was not small. At 8:30, a man named Aldridge, a heavy-set merchant with a carrying voice and an opinion about everything, planted himself at Nathaniel's elbow and began a conversation that seemed designed to establish social dominance through sheer volume. Clara watched Nathaniel's expression go polite and impenetrable, watched the wall come up in a single breath, and felt something sharp turn over in her chest, because Eleanor had described that wall, and now she could see exactly when it appeared and why. She stepped in without thinking about it. "Mr. Aldridge," she said, clearly moving to Nathaniel's other side. "You mentioned earlier that you had concerns about the 3rd Street building survey. I'd very much like to hear them. I've been reading the Society's notes on structural preservation, and I confess I have questions about the methodology." Aldridge blinked. He turned. He was a man who enjoyed an audience, and here was a young woman in a pale gold dress offering him one, and he took it the way such men always did, immediately and without suspicion. Within 4 minutes, he had moved his focus entirely and was holding forth about the survey with great conviction and no particular expertise. Nathaniel said very quietly into the air, approximately 1 inch to her left, "Thank you." "The methodology really is questionable," Clara murmured back. She felt rather than heard him suppress something that might have been a laugh. He walked them to their carriage at 9. This was also, Eleanor did not say, but her entire bearing communicated unprecedented. At the carriage door, he paused. The evening was warm and close, and Boston was doing what Boston did in summer, moving restless, smelling of salt and horse, and the peculiar aliveness of a city that had not yet decided to sleep. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, "I owe you an honest statement." Clara waited. I am not a man who finds this." He stopped. Started again. "Eleanor has attempted to introduce me to a number of women over the past 3 years. I have been, by any fair accounting, difficult about it." "She mentioned," Clara said. "I suspected she might." A pause. "The women were perfectly suitable. The problem was not them. I am aware of that. But there is a particular feeling that comes with being guided toward something, and I have never been able to trust whether the interest is real or arranged," Clara said. He looked at her. "You told me tonight," she said carefully. "At the beginning, when I told you what Eleanor had done. You went still for a moment, and I could see you deciding whether to be angry." She held his gaze. "You weren't angry." "No." "Because I told you first." "Because you told me first," he agreed. "Most people given the same information would have said nothing, would have let the evening play out and calculated that I'd never know." "Most people would be right," Clara said. "You probably wouldn't have known. But you told me anyway. I told you anyway." She smoothed one glove in a gesture she recognized as nervous and stopped doing it. "I am not Mr. Whitaker, I want to be clear. I am not in a position to be sophisticated about this. My family has very little. My options are narrower than they should be. I understand that Lord Thorne's existence in this city means that women like me are supposed to be grateful for any offer that is not cruel." She lifted her chin slightly. "I am not going to pretend that I am here entirely without practical consideration, but I am also not going to pretend that this evening was not the most genuinely interesting conversation I have had in a very long time. Both of those things are true at once. I would rather you know them both." The silence between them was full. Nathaniel looked at her with that particular stillness she was starting to recognize as his version of attention paid in full. "That," he said at last, "is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in a social context in approximately 6 years. Is that good? I have not yet decided if it's good or terrifying." His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before. Something lighter, something that wasn't armor. I find that those two things are often the same. Eleanor was watching them from inside the carriage with the expression of a woman exercising enormous restraint. I will be in Boston until Monday, Nathaniel said. The society has a lecture Thursday and a dinner Friday. A pause. I would like if you were willing to continue this conversation. Clara looked at him. The conversation about the placard. The conversation about everything. She held his gaze for one breath. 2. Yes, she said. I would like that. So, he left. The carriage moved. Eleanor lasted approximately 30 seconds. Well, she said. Don't, Clara said. I haven't said anything. You're about to say 6 things. Clara looked out the window at the moving city. Her hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady. He is more than I expected. He usually is, Eleanor said, and there was something soft in her voice that wasn't triumph at all. That's the thing about Nathaniel. He is more than he lets people see. He stopped showing it for a while. After Catherine. She was quiet a moment. I have not heard him speak to someone like that in I don't know how long, like he wasn't managing the distance between them. She paused. He asked about Thorne. Yes, he doesn't ask about people, he files them. Eleanor's voice was careful. When he asks about someone, it means he intends to do something about it. Clara turned from the window. What do you mean? I mean that my brother has very quiet opinions and very permanent ones. And one of his permanent opinions is that women should not have their wrists grabbed in public by men who consider it generosity. Eleanor looked at her steadily. Whatever he decides to do with that information, it will not be nothing. Clara lay awake that night in Mary's quiet guest room with the window open to the warm dark and the distant sound of the city turning over in its sleep. She thought about Nathaniel Whitaker's voice, the way it had gone flat when he said predation, not dramatic, just exact the way a man uses a word when he has already thought the thing through completely and is simply stating the conclusion. She thought about the way he'd gone still when she confessed Eleanor's arrangement, and how the stillness had not been the stillness of betrayal, but of someone running rapid calculations that ended somewhere unexpected. She thought about Lord Thorne, who would wake up tomorrow in his comfortable house and assume the world was continuing in the direction he'd arranged it. She thought about her mother, who had written her 3 letters in the past week that said in 3 different formulations, "We cannot hold out much longer. Clara, you must be practical. You must think of the family." She thought about practical, about what it had meant her whole life, mean it now. The word had been used like a hand, pressing down on the back of her neck, patient and inexorable. Be practical, which had always meant want less. Expect less. Accept what is offered because something is better than nothing. Nathaniel Whitaker had looked at her tonight and said the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 6 years and had not looked away. Clara stared at the ceiling and let herself quietly in the dark where no one could see it want more. Thursday's lecture was on structural renovation methods in post-colonial American architecture, and it was objectively not the kind of event that produced dramatic turning points. And yet, Nathaniel found her, before the lecture began, not engineered, not arranged, simply the result of 2 people arriving at the same door at the same time. He handed her a program. She thanked him. They sat 3 rows from the front, Eleanor conspicuously choosing a seat in the second row that left precisely enough space beside Nathaniel for one person. The lecturer was thorough and occasionally brilliant and frequently slow. Nathaniel wrote 3 words in the margin of his program and tilted it slightly toward her. She read, "He's wrong here." She wrote back below his note, "Show me." What followed was 25 minutes of the most quietly absorbing conversation she had ever conducted at a 90-degree angle through program margins. His handwriting, small and precise. Hers, looping slightly in the way that always happened when she was excited and trying not to show it. He corrected the lecturer twice in the margins, and she pushed back on one correction and was right. And the way he absorbed that, The slight pause, the nod, the single word fair told her more about him than an hour of ordinary conversation would have. Then the lecturer reached his conclusion, and someone in the audience stood to ask a question, and the someone was Lord Thorne. Clara did not move. She would be proud of that later. She did not flinch, did not drop the program, did not make a single visible adjustment. But her breath changed, and she was almost certain Nathaniel didn't notice. She was wrong. Thorne asked his question something self-important about land value and preservation costs, and the lecturer answered, and Thorne sat down with the satisfaction of a man who has just reminded a room of his presence. He had not looked in Clara's direction. She was not sure if that was worse or better. Nathaniel leaned slightly toward her, barely a degree, barely enough to be visible. He did not look at her. His voice was barely above a breath. "He won't come near you," he said. "Not here, not tonight." Clara kept her eyes forward. "You can't know that." "I can," Nathaniel said. And then, after a half-beat, "I had a conversation with him this morning." Clara turned her head. Nathaniel was looking at the front of the room, his expression entirely composed. "I told him I had a business interest in the Whitcomb estate, that I had engaged a solicitor regarding certain debts, that any further overtures toward the eldest daughter of the family might complicate a legal situation he would find inconvenient." A pause. "I may have overstated the current state of the solicitor engagement." Clara stared at him. "You did that this morning." "I did." "You have known me for one evening." Nathaniel turned to look at her then, and his eyes were direct and unashamed and completely serious. "I have known you for one evening," he agreed. "And I have known men like Thorne for considerably longer." A pause. "I will tell you if I've overstepped. If you'd prefer I hadn't—" "No," Clara said. The word came out before she could temper it, then steadier. "No, I would not prefer that." She looked at him for a moment, really looked. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet," Nathaniel said quietly. "Thorne doesn't give up. He recalculates." His jaw tightened fractionally. "But he will leave you alone long enough for you to breathe. That was all I was after." Clara held on to that sentence, "long enough for you to breathe," and felt something happen in her chest that she was not quite ready to name. The lecture ended. The room began to move and murmur. Eleanor appeared beside them with the bright, careful look of a woman who had noticed everything and was choosing her moment. "Dinner," she said. "Both of you. No arguments." Nathaniel looked at Clara. Clara looked at Nathaniel. "She'll win anyway," Nathaniel said. "I know," Clara said. And for the first time in 4 months, she smiled without calculating what it cost her. Dinner was at Eleanor's cousin Mary's house, which had a dining table that seated 8 and a cook who understood that good food was an act of hospitality and not a performance. There were 6 of them. Eleanor, Mary's husband George, a quiet architect named Patterson, who had presented at the lecture, and Nathaniel and Clara, who had been seated through no accident. Clara could identify directly across from each other. It should have been awkward. It was not. That was the thing Clara could not entirely account for, the way the evening moved, with a naturalness that had no right to exist, given that she had known this man for 48 hours, and had come to this city hiding from a man who considered her desperation an opportunity. She should have been performing. She had spent 4 months performing composure at teas, where women looked at her with that particular mix of pity and relief that meant, thank God it wasn't me performing confidence at church on Sundays, performing optimism in letters to her mother, that said things are progressing when things were not progressing at all. She was not performing now. Patterson asked her opinion about the lecture's 3rd point. She gave it. George disagreed with her. She disagreed back clearly with reasons, and watched George's expression move from mild surprise to genuine engagement. Eleanor watched all of this with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has placed a bet and is watching it pay. Nathaniel said very little for the first 40 minutes. He ate, he listened. He asked Patterson 2 technical questions that opened the conversation wider, and then stepped back out of it with the ease of a man who understood that contribution was not the same as dominance. Then Mary said lightly over the dessert course, "Mr. Whitaker, I understand you've been managing Whitaker Hall alone since your father passed. That's a great deal of ground to cover for one person." "It is," Nathaniel said. "Have you ever considered—" Mary began. "Mary," Eleanor said pleasantly. Mary smiled and redirected herself toward the strawberry tart. Clara looked at the table and pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. Nathaniel, she noticed. After dinner, while George and Patterson debated something about timber framing in the parlor, and Eleanor and Mary were conspicuously occupied in the kitchen, Nathaniel and Clara ended up on opposite sides of the room near the bookshelves, which had, Clara was increasingly certain, been arranged by Eleanor, with the deliberate intention of providing two people with something to stand near while talking. "You almost laughed," Nathaniel said. "I did not almost laugh," Clara said. "Your mouth did something." "My mouth is not your concern." There was a beat. Then Nathaniel said very quietly, "That is objectively the least true thing you have said to me since Thursday." Clara looked at him. He was looking at the bookshelves. His expression was entirely composed, but there was something in the set of his mouth that she was beginning to learn the almost ease, the thing that was nearly warmth. "Mr. Whitaker," she said. Are you making a joke?" "I am," he said, attempting to be a person. "I find it somewhat easier in your company than in most." A pause. "I thought you should know that." Clara held onto the shelf edge behind her. "I also—" Nathaniel continued, not looking at her, "owe you complete honesty about something I said Thursday. When I told Thorne I had engaged a solicitor regarding the Whitcomb estate, that was not, as I said, entirely accurate at the time." He turned to look at her, then direct and unapologetic. "It is now." Clara went still. "I beg your pardon. I spoke to my solicitor this morning. There is a legitimate pathway to acquiring the primary Whitcomb debt at current market value and restructuring it in a way that removes Thorne's leverage entirely. It would take approximately 6 weeks to execute." He met her eyes steadily. "I want you to know this is not a condition. It is not a trade. If you tell me right now to withdraw it, I will withdraw it, and we will not speak of it again. But I will not do it without your knowledge and your consent. That is not the kind of man I intend to be." The room had gone very quiet. "Why?" Clara asked, and her voice was lower than she intended. "Because it can be done. Because Thorne should not be allowed to profit from a family's misfortune. And because—" He stopped. Something crossed his face that was more exposed than anything she'd seen from him. "Because 3 days ago, I walked into a lecture hall, and a woman told me the truth before she had any reason to, and I have not been able to think clearly since." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "You've known me for 3 days, she said. "I know," he said. You can't know enough about me to—" "I know that you corrected me about the 1742 survey, and were right," he said. "I know that you deflected Aldridge without making him feel managed. I know that when Thorne walked into the lecture hall, you did not flinch, and I know that cost you something. I know that you told me something true on the first night that most people would have hidden, and I know why you told me." He held her gaze without apology. "I know that you are fighting very hard to need nothing from anyone. And I know what that costs a person. I have been doing it for 3 years." Clara's hands were not steady. She was glad they were behind her on the shelf. "If I say yes," she said, "to the solicitor, I am not saying anything else, Nathaniel. I am not agreeing to—" "You are agreeing to nothing, except allowing me to remove a threat." His voice was even careful and completely certain. "Everything else is entirely your own." She looked at him. He looked at her. "Yes," she said. "All right. Yes." Eleanor appeared in the doorway holding 2 cups of tea with the expression of a woman who had definitely not been listening, and absolutely had. Friday's society dinner changed everything. Not in the way anyone planned, not in the way Eleanor had engineered or Clara had calculated, or Nathaniel had quietly decided. It changed in the way that things change when one person decides to burn something to the ground. Lord Thorne arrived at the dinner in a mood that Clara recognized the moment he walked in, the particular tightness around his mouth, the way his eyes moved around the room doing inventory. He had been thinking. He had been recalculating. And whatever he had concluded, it had not improved his temperament. He found her within 10 minutes. Not grabbing, not touching, he was too careful for that with Nathaniel in the room. But he placed himself between her and the nearest exit, with the ease of long practice, and his voice was low enough that only she could hear. "Miss Whitcomb, I understand congratulations are in order. Word has reached me that Whitaker has developed an interest in your family's financial situation." Clara kept her expression neutral. "I don't know what you mean. I think you do." He smiled. It was an awful smile. "He's a good man, Whitaker. Decent. Honorable. The sort of man who believes in doing right by people." He paused. "The sort of man who might be very pained to learn that the woman he's taken an interest in has been guided toward him deliberately. That her circumstances were presented to his sympathetic sister in order to manufacture a connection." Clara's heart rate spiked. She did not let it show. "What are you saying?" "I am saying," Thorne said quietly, "that I know Eleanor Bellamy has been making inquiries about your family for 6 weeks. I know she arranged for you to encounter her carriage. I know this entire courtship, or whatever you intend to call it, was engineered." His eyes were cold and absolutely satisfied. "I wonder what Whitaker would think about that." "He already knows," Clara said. Thorne blinked. "I told him," Clara said. "The first night, before he could ask." She held Thorne's gaze without blinking. "That is the difference between you and him, Lord Thorne. He wanted to know the truth. You're trying to use it." Something dark moved across Thorne's face. The smile disappeared. "You think you've won something," he said. "I think I'm standing in a room full of people," Clara said, "and this time one of them is paying attention." She stepped around him. He let her go because Nathaniel had appeared from the other side of the room, 12 feet away, not moving, not speaking, simply standing with that particular stillness that Clara now understood was not passivity, but its precise opposite. Thorne looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at Thorne. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. Thorne moved toward the far end of the room. He did not approach Clara again that evening. But the damage had been seeded in a direction Clara hadn't anticipated. It was not Nathaniel that Thorne reached. It was Mrs. Harrington. Mrs. Constance Harrington was 61 years old and had been the social linchpin of Boston society for 20 years. She was not cruel. That was the important thing to understand about her, the thing that made her more dangerous than cruelty. She was simply committed with a genuine and thorough dedication to the idea that things ought to be done properly, and improper things made her genuinely distressed. She found Eleanor Saturday morning. Clara was not there for the conversation. Eleanor told her about it afterward, sitting in Mary's parlor with a cup of tea. She was not drinking her expression careful in the way it only got when she was controlling something. She said, "Eleanor reported that it had come to her attention that I had arranged an introduction between you and Nathaniel under false pretenses, that you had been positioned." Her word. That any connection formed under those circumstances could not be considered genuine, and that Nathaniel, who had suffered enough already in his personal life, deserved to be protected from. Eleanor stopped, set down the cup. "From women who pursue an attachment for financial relief." The words hit Clara in the stomach like cold water. "She called me that," Clara said. "She was not unkind about it," Eleanor said, which was somehow worse. "She was genuinely worried. For him." A pause. "That is what Thorne counted on. Not making Nathaniel doubt you. Making the people Nathaniel trusts worry about him." Clara sat with that. Let it settle. Let herself feel the full cold weight of it before she decided what to do with it. "Does Nathaniel know?" she asked. "Not yet. Where is he?" "At the Society Library. He goes there Saturday mornings. Eleanor looked at her carefully. Clara, you do not have to. Tell me where the library is, Clara said. She found him in the East Reading Room, which she knew because it was the one with the 1742 records, and she had learned in the space of 4 days exactly where Nathaniel Whitaker went when he needed to think. He looked up when she came in. He read her face in approximately 1 second. Sit down, he said. Tell me. She told him. All of it. Thorne's approach at the dinner, what he'd said, what she'd said back. Mrs. Harrington's conversation with Eleanor, the phrase financial relief. She said it plainly without softening it, because she had promised herself at the beginning that if this went wrong, it would not go wrong because she had hidden something. When she finished, Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. You came to tell me yourself, he said. Yes. Instead of waiting to see if I'd hear it elsewhere. Yes. He looked at her steadily. Why do you keep doing that? Doing what? Telling me the things that could cost you something. His voice was not angry. It was something more complicated than anger. Most people in your position would calculate, would decide what I needed not to know. You don't do that. No, Clara said. I don't. Why not? She met his eyes. Because I decided 4 days ago that if the only version of this that worked was one built on managed information, then it wasn't worth having. I would rather lose it honestly than keep it through silence. She paused. That is the only thing I have that Thorne can't take. My willingness to say the true thing, even when it's costly. Nathaniel stood up. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe it was simply that he was no longer keeping that careful social distance that measured politeness as space. Mrs. Harrington is not wrong about one thing, he said. The beginning was arranged. Yes, Clara said. Eleanor chose you before you knew me, designed circumstances to bring us together. Yes. And you, Nathaniel said, told me that on the first night, without being asked, without knowing how I'd respond. He took one step closer, which means that every conversation we have had since that moment has been between two people who knew exactly what the ground under them was made of. Clara held her ground. Yes. Then Thorne has nothing, Nathaniel said. And Mrs. Harrington's concern, however well-intentioned, is addressing a problem that was resolved 4 days ago by your own honesty. He looked at her with those direct, serious eyes. You resolved it, before I even thought to ask. Clara exhaled slowly. You're not. I am not angry. He said it firmly. I am not doubting you. I am not reconsidering. He paused and something shifted in his expression, something that moved past the careful steadiness into something raw. What I am very tired of watching people try to take things from you. Things you shouldn't have had to protect in the first place. Clara looked at him. At his face, which was not composed now, not performing the controlled, polished Whitaker reserve. He looked tired and real, and certain the way people look when they have made a decision so completely that defending it would be redundant. Nathaniel, she said softly. I am going to speak to Mrs. Harrington today, he said. Directly. I will tell her what I know, which is the complete account, and I will tell her that her concern, while kind, is addressing a version of events that does not exist. A pause. And then I am going to find Thorne. Clara's breath caught. What are you going to do? Nothing illegal, he said, and there was a dry, grim quality to it that was almost dark. But there are 3 men on the Society's board who have done business with Thorne in the last 2 years. I have documentation of a land transaction he conducted in New York last year that did not survive close examination. I did not use it before because it was not my business to use. He met her eyes steadily. It is now. The air between them felt changed, charged with something that was not quite the careful intellectual connection of the past 4 days. That had been real. This was something else on top of it. The particular intimacy of standing beside someone when the ground got difficult and finding they don't move. You keep doing things, Clara said, and her voice came out unsteady in a way she hadn't planned. Before I can ask, before I even know I need them. You shouldn't have to ask, Nathaniel said simply. She looked at him, truly looked the way she had looked at that placard on the first night before she knew he was watching. She looked at the line of his jaw and the steadiness of his hands and the 3 years of careful guarding that was still in the set of his shoulders and the fact that he was here in this room not recalculating but simply standing with her. When Catherine died, she said carefully. Eleanor said you blamed yourself. He was quiet. Not for her death, Clara said. For the marriage itself. For going into it the way you did. Yes, he said. Because you chose duty over the real thing. And then there wasn't time to correct it. Yes, she held his gaze. I am not asking you to be something you're not ready to be. I am not asking for anything except exactly what this is. She gestured slightly between them. But I want you to know that I see the difference between what you were with her and what you are right now. She paused. You're not managing distance with me. You haven't been since Thursday. Nathaniel looked at her for a long, still moment. No, he said, I haven't. Outside, Boston was doing its Saturday morning business carts and voices and the restless ordinary life of a city that did not know or care that something was shifting in the East Reading Room of the Preservation Society Library. I will handle Thorne and Harrington today, Nathaniel said. His voice was steady, but the distance was gone from it. Completely gone. And then if you are willing, I would like to take you to see the harbor. Not as... He stopped. Not arranged. Not strategic. Just, I would like to show you something I find worth seeing, and I would like to show it to you. Clara looked at him for one breath. 2. I'd like that, she said, and she meant only that and everything that was underneath it, and they both knew it. The harbor was everything Nathaniel had said it would be, and nothing like Clara had expected. She had expected him to talk about it the way he talked about architecture, with precision, with historical context, with the measured appreciation of a man who understood things structurally. She had expected information. Instead, he was quiet for the first 10 minutes, standing at the edge of the dock with his coat open to the summer wind, and the quiet was not uncomfortable. It was the quiet of a person who has brought you somewhere real and is waiting to see if you feel it too. She felt it. My father brought me here when I was 8, Nathaniel said finally. He told me that a harbor is the place where a city shows what it actually values. Not the churches, not the courts, the harbor. Because the harbor is where everything that keeps people alive comes in, and everything they've made goes out. He paused. He said if you want to understand a city's character, don't read the newspapers. Stand here for an hour. Clara looked out at the water. He sounds like he was worth knowing. He was the best man I've known, Nathaniel said, and then after a beat, until recently I thought the category was closed. Clara did not look at him, but she heard the precise weight of it, the fact that he had said it plainly without decoration or strategy, the way he said everything that actually mattered. Nathaniel, she said. I know, he said quietly. I know it's fast. I know there are approximately 12 reasons why a man of sense would proceed more carefully. He paused. I have been a man of sense for 6 years. I have been careful and measured and appropriate, and what it has gotten me is a very well-managed estate and a life with no one in it who knows where I go on Saturday mornings. Clara turned to look at him then. You go to the library, she said. You knew that in 4 days, he said. My nearest neighbor in the Hudson Valley has known me for 11 years. He thinks I go to the society offices. He looked at her with that direct, unguarded attention. I don't know what to do with that except say it out loud. Then say it out loud, Clara said softly. I'm listening. They walked for 2 hours. Not arranged, not strategic. Just 2 people moving through a city in summer, talking the way people talk when they have stopped performing for each other. Which is to say, about everything and nothing about his father and her mother. About the first book that had ever made each of them feel seen, about what they each did when they were frightened, about what frightened them. Clara told him about the night in February, when the creditors had come, and she had sat with her mother on the stairs of Whitcomb Hall, listening to men catalog everything her family had built, and she had made a decision. Had felt something settle in her chest, like iron cooling into its final shape, that she would not let it break her. That whatever came next, she would face it standing. Nathaniel listened, the way he always listened, like nothing else existed. "You were 22 in February," he said. "Yes. And you decided that alone." "There was no one else to decide it," Clara said. He was quiet for a moment. "There should have been." "Yes," she said. "There should have been." She looked at him sideways. "There will be, I think. Eventually. For both of us." His hand brushed hers as they walked, barely, almost accidental, and neither of them moved away. He went to Mrs. Harrington that afternoon as promised. Eleanor told Clara about it the next morning, with the expression of someone describing a battle she had watched from a very good vantage point. Nathaniel had arrived at Mrs. Harrington's house unannounced, which had startled her considerably. He had sat across from her in her parlor and told her in complete and documented detail the full account of the previous 6 days, including the fact that Clara had disclosed Eleanor's arrangement on the first night, including the content of Thorne's approach at the Friday dinner, including the New York land transaction that Nathaniel had quietly handed to 2 members of the society's board that morning. He told her. Eleanor said that he was not a man who required protection from honesty, that the woman she was concerned about had given him more honesty in 4 days than most people managed in 4 years, and that if she had genuine concern for his well-being, the most useful thing she could do was consider carefully who in this situation was acting in good faith and who was using her as an instrument. Clara was quiet for a moment. How did she respond? She was silent for approximately 30 seconds, Eleanor said. Then she said, "I see I have been given a partial account." And then she asked him to stay for tea. Eleanor looked at her. "She is going to call on you this week." Harrington, she is not a cruel woman. Eleanor said the same thing Clara had thought about her, and hearing it said aloud made the breath come easier. She was misled. When she understands that, she corrects it. That is actually more than you can say for most people. And Thorne. Eleanor's expression went still and careful in a way Clara recognized. The board met this morning. The land transaction Nathaniel documented was more significant than I think even Nathaniel realized when he first found it. One of the board members had direct financial exposure. Thorne has been asked to resign his society membership. She paused. He left Boston last night. Clara sat very still. He was gone. 4 months of walking carefully, of measuring every public appearance, of calculating the cost of every smile and every refusal, and he was simply gone. Not because she had endured long enough or capitulated or made herself small enough. Because someone had stood up with documentation and said, "This is what is actually happening," and people with the power to act had acted. She had not expected to feel so many things at once. Relief was the one on top. Underneath it was something more complicated, a grief she hadn't allowed herself for the 4 months she'd spent being afraid for the version of herself that had learned to calculate everything, for all the things that fear makes you practice that you don't know how to unpractice just because the threat is removed. "Clara," Eleanor said. "I'm all right," Clara said. "I know you are," Eleanor said, "but you don't have to be immediately." Clara looked at her, at this woman who had left a carriage door open at the east entrance and changed the entire direction of her life, and felt something she couldn't quite contain move through her chest. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, "for any of this, from the beginning." "Don't thank me," Eleanor said. "You did the hard part. Every time there was a moment where you could have hidden something and you didn't, that was you. I just opened a door." "You opened the right door," Clara said. Eleanor looked at her with those steady dark eyes and said simply, "Yes, I did." Nathaniel came Sunday evening. Not for dinner, not for a society event, not for any arranged occasion. He came to Mary's house and knocked and asked when Mary answered if Miss Whitcomb might be available to speak with him for a short while. Clara came downstairs to find him standing in the front hall with his hat in his hands, not fidgeting, because Nathaniel didn't fidget, but holding it with the particular care of a man who is aware that his hands need to be doing something. "Walk with me," he said. They walked. For a while, neither of them said anything, which was fine, because the silence between them had never been empty. It was a working silence, the kind where both people are thinking hard and can feel that the other one is too. Then Nathaniel said, "I need to tell you something that I should have told you sooner, about Catherine." Clara looked at him. "I told you the marriage was practical," he said. "That's true. I told you we were unhappy. That's also true. What I didn't tell you is that 6 months before she died, Catherine told me she had been in love with someone else when we married, a man her family had rejected because he had no property." He kept walking, kept his voice even, but Clara could hear the weight underneath it. "She told me because she was sick, and because she was done carrying it, I think. She said she was sorry, that she had tried to love me, that she thought perhaps I understood what it was to be practical about something that should have been otherwise." Clara absorbed this quietly. "What did you say to her?" she asked. "I told her that I was sorry too, that I had known in some way I hadn't let myself examine that we had both been resigned, and that she deserved better than resignation." He paused. "She died 3 weeks later, and I have spent 3 years trying to figure out if what I felt was grief or guilt or some combination that I don't have a word for." "Both," Clara said gently. "It's both. It can be both." He looked at her. "Yes, I know that now." A pause. "What I did not know, what I think I was not willing to know, is that it is also possible to choose differently. That choosing otherwise is not a betrayal of something you got wrong. That you're allowed to learn from it, and then—" He stopped walking. Clara stopped too. "And then try again," he said. "Differently, correctly." She looked at him. He was looking at her with the most unguarded expression she had ever seen on his face. The walls entirely, down the 3 years of careful distance, folded away, just a man standing on a Boston street in summer, telling her something true. "Nathaniel," she said softly. "I am not asking you for anything tonight," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I am not. This is not a proposal or a negotiation or a condition attached to anything I have done regarding Thorne or the solicitor. Those things stand regardless of everything else." He held her gaze. "But I want you to know that what has happened this week, that it is not for me a transaction or a convenience or something I will file away when I return to the Hudson Valley." A pause. "I have not felt this way about a conversation in 11 years, possibly longer. And I thought you deserved to hear me say it plainly." Clara held the words for a moment. Let them be real. "I wrote a letter to my mother this morning," she said. Nathaniel waited. "I told her that things were changing, that she should not, that she should stop writing letters about being practical." She met his eyes. "I told her that I had met someone who understood the difference between a transaction and a choice." Something moved across his face. "What did you tell her about him?" "I told her he went to the library on Saturday mornings," Clara said, "and that he was more than I expected, and that for the first time in a very long time, I was not afraid of wanting something." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I am going to need to return to the Hudson Valley on Monday." "I know," she said. "The estate requires there are things I cannot manage from Boston for more than a week." He paused. "I would like to write to you, if that is—" "Yes," Clara said. "And I would like in 6 weeks, when the solicitor's work is complete regarding your family's debt, I would like to come back to Boston." He held her gaze. "Not for the society, not for any practical reason." He paused. "For you." The summer evening settled around them, warm and real and entirely present. "You should know," Clara said carefully, "that I am not that I intend to find work, something real. I have been corresponding with a women's academy in Cambridge about a teaching position. I have no intention of being a problem that needs solving." Her chin was up and she knew it. I want to be chosen Nathaniel, not rescued. I know, he said, and the simplicity of it, the complete absence of argument or condescension, hit her somewhere she hadn't fully defended. You know, she repeated. It is one of the things I find most... He stopped, started again. I have never in my life met someone who fought so hard not to need anything from anyone, and somehow made me feel that being needed by them would be worth every difficult thing. Clara looked at him. Really looked. You, she said quietly, are considerably more than Eleanor told me you were. She undersells me, he agreed, and the almost laugh was back in his voice, and the warmth that she had begun to think of as the real Nathaniel, the one under the reserve and the 3 years of careful management, was entirely present. She really does, Clara said. He left Monday morning. Eleanor walked him to the carriage because Eleanor always walked people out because she believed that arrivals and departures were the moments that revealed what you actually felt about someone, and she refused to waste either. Clara stood on the front step of Mary's house and watched the Whittaker carriage move down the street, and she held the week in her hands, the way you hold something you have been given that you did not expect and do not entirely trust yet and want more than you've wanted anything in a long time. She went inside. She sat down at the writing desk in Mary's parlor. She had a letter to finish to the Cambridge Academy about the teaching position, a real letter, a practical letter, a letter written by someone who intended to build something that was hers. She was halfway through the second paragraph when Eleanor came in and sat across from her without being asked. He talked about you the entire way to the carriage, Eleanor said. Eleanor. Specifically, he said, and I quote, that you were the most... I don't need to hear it, Clara said. You do, Eleanor said, and her voice was different now, quieter, more serious, without the matchmaking satisfaction. Just a woman saying something true. He said you were the most honest person he had met since his father. That is not a small thing for Nathaniel. That is the largest thing he has. Clara set down her pen. She thought about Lord Thorne, who was gone. About Whitcomb Hall, which was not yet saved, but which had a pathway now through a solicitor who was working on it. About her mother, who would read a letter tomorrow morning and perhaps put down the weight of be practical for one day. About a women's academy in Cambridge that needed someone who understood what it meant to fight for knowledge without apology. She thought about a man who went to the library on Saturday mornings and had not told anyone but her. Eleanor, she said. Yes. Thank you. She held the other woman's gaze. Not for the arrangement, not for the carriage, for believing I was worth the effort before you had any reason to. Eleanor looked at her steadily. I had reasons, she said. You simply didn't know yet that they were visible. Clara picked up her pen, finished the letter to Cambridge, folded it, addressed it, set it aside. Then she took out a fresh sheet of paper and began a letter to no one. She had an address for yet, just words moving down the page. Real ones hers, and felt for the first time since February that the future was not something to be survived, but something to be built. The first letter arrived on Wednesday. Clara was at the writing desk in Mary's parlor when Eleanor brought it in, not handed it over casually, but set it down with both hands and a deliberate neutrality of expression that communicated everything. The handwriting on the outside was small and precise. Clara did not open it immediately. She held it for a moment, aware that Eleanor was watching, and pretending not to aware that her own hands were steadier than she expected them to be. Then she broke the seal and read. It was not a love letter. That was the first thing she understood. It was better than a love letter. It was a letter from a man who had something to say, and said it directly without ornament or strategy. He wrote about the road back to the Hudson Valley, about the particular quality of the light on the river when he'd arrived home at dusk, about a problem with the East Wing drainage that his estate manager had been managing incorrectly for 2 years, and that he had finally resolved that morning. He wrote about a book he had pulled from his shelf the night before and had not been able to read because he kept stopping on a passage that reminded him of something she had said at the lecture about structural integrity being a moral question as much as a practical one. At the bottom, in the same small, precise hand, he wrote, I find I am looking forward to Saturday mornings considerably less than I used to. The library is the same. The difference is the absence. I had not expected that. Clara read it twice. Then she folded it, placed it in the small cedar box she had bought at a market stall the previous morning for no reason she'd admitted to herself at the time, and began her reply. She wrote back the same day. He wrote again by Friday. By the end of the second week, there were 7 letters in the cedar box, and Clara had stopped pretending even to herself what they represented. The Cambridge Academy responded on a Thursday. Yes, they had a position beginning in September, teaching composition and rhetoric to young women aged 14 to 18. The salary was modest, and the work would be real, and Clara read the letter 3 times and felt something expand in her chest that had nothing to do with Nathaniel and everything to do with herself, with the version of herself that had sat on the stairs in February and decided not to break. She wrote to her mother the same afternoon. Not a careful letter, not a managed letter. A real one, the kind she had been rationing for months because real things cost something and she had been running low. She told her mother about the position, about Eleanor, about Nathaniel, not everything but enough. She told her that Whitcomb Hall's primary debt was in the process of being restructured, and that by October it would be manageable in a way it had not been since January. Her mother wrote back in 4 days. The letter was short. At the end of it, her mother said, "I do not entirely understand what has happened, Clara, but I understand that you did it standing up. I should not be surprised. You have always been the one who stood up." Clara read that line 4 times. Then she put the letter in the cedar box with Nathaniel's. He came back on a Saturday. 6 weeks after he'd left, exactly as he'd said, not early, not late, because Nathaniel Whitaker said what he meant and meant what he said. And Clara had built enough of her new architecture on that understanding that she would have noticed the absence of it like a missing floor. Eleanor told her Friday evening that he was expected the following morning. Clara nodded and went to bed and lay awake for approximately 2 hours before she decided that was unproductive, and got up and reread the last 3 letters instead, which was not less sentimental, but was at least active. He arrived at 10. She was in the parlor when she heard the knock, and she heard Eleanor answer, and she heard his voice low, certain the particular cadence of it that she had been carrying in her head for 6 weeks, and she stayed in the parlor because she understood instinctively that this was a moment that deserved to be met calmly. She was not entirely calm, but she was standing when he came through the door, and that was enough. "Miss Whitcomb," he said. "Mr. Whitaker," she said. They looked at each other across the parlor for one breath, and then the formality fell away entirely because it had always been a performance between them, and they had both known it. "You look well," he said. "You look tired," she said. "I have been working very hard for 6 weeks in order to be here," he said. And there was something in his voice, dry, warm, entirely Nathaniel, that made her feel the 6 weeks close like a door behind her. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, took one look at them, and said she had something to attend to in another part of the house. She said it very convincingly. Neither of them believed her. Neg. He had brought the completed solicitor's documents. This was not romantic. It was real, which Clara had learned was better. He sat across from her at Mary's parlor table and walked her through the restructured debt agreement, the primary creditors, the revised terms, the timeline, what it meant for the estate, and what it meant for her mother's ability to remain in the house she had lived in for 30 years. Clara read every page, asked questions about 2 provisions she didn't understand. He answered them precisely without condescension, and when she identified a term in the 3rd section that she thought should have read differently, he looked at it and said, "You're right. I'll have Richardson amend it Monday." She looked up from the documents. He was watching her with that look, the complete attention, the forward lean. "You're doing it," she said. "What?" "The listening posture," she said. "Eleanor's name for it." Something moved in his expression, warm and unguarded and entirely real. "I do it when something matters," he said quietly. Clara set the documents down. "The Cambridge position is confirmed," she said. "I start in September. It's composition and rhetoric. The salary is not large, but it's mine. She held his gaze. I want you to know that before anything else is said today, I want you to know that I have something that is mine. I know, he said. I received a letter last week from an acquaintance on the Cambridge board. He mentioned a new instructor who had written the finest application letter he had received in 11 years of reviewing them. He paused. He described her as someone who understood that education was not charity, but the restoration of what belonged to people by right. A beat. I recognized the phrasing. Clara felt something warm move through her chest. You didn't tell me. I wanted to hear you say it yourself first. He held her gaze. I will always want to hear you say things yourself first. They walked to the harbor. Not because it was arranged, nothing between them was arranged anymore, hadn't been since the first night, but because it was where they had been honest about the most important things, and it seemed right to go back there. They walked without touching, but the distance between them was different now from anything it had been before. Not the careful management of part 1, not the charged tension of part 3, not the tender uncertainty of the week before he'd left. It was the distance of two people who have decided something and are simply living inside the decision. He said, I have been thinking about what it would mean to bring someone to the Hudson Valley. Clara listened. It is not Boston, he said. It is quieter, more isolated in certain ways. The nearest town is small. The society there is not unkind, but not sophisticated. He paused. I would not want you to choose it because it was practical. I would not want you to choose it because of the debt resolution or because of anything I have done. I would want you to choose it because... He stopped. Because, she said. Because you wanted to, he said. That is all. Just because you genuinely freely wanted to. Clara looked at him sideways. You understand that the Cambridge position is in Cambridge. I do. Which is not the Hudson Valley. I am aware of the geography. So, whatever I choose, she said carefully, it would require arrangements, planning, a considerable amount of practical navigation. Yes, Nathaniel said. You're not troubled by that. I am a man who has managed a large estate alone for 6 years, he said. I am not troubled by practical navigation. I am troubled by the wrong thing being navigated toward. He looked at her directly. I would rather navigate correctly toward something difficult than easily toward something wrong. I have done the second. I know what it costs. Clara held that. Held it and turned it over and let it be what it was. A man who had learned something hard and was applying it without drama, without performance, just with the quiet certainty of someone who understood the difference between duty and choice. I would like to see the Hudson Valley, she said. Nathaniel looked at her. Before September, she said. Before I begin at Cambridge, I would like to come and see where you go on Saturday mornings when you are home, and whether the library is better or worse than Boston's, and what the East Wing drainage problem looked like before you fixed it. She paused. And whether it is the kind of place a person could build something in, not just live in, build. It is, Nathaniel said, and the certainty in his voice was absolute. You're very sure. I have been thinking for 6 weeks about nothing else, he said simply. The twist came from a direction neither of them had looked. It came from Clara's mother. Mrs. Whitcomb arrived in Boston unannounced on a Tuesday, not because she was dramatic, but because she had made a decision, and she was, as Clara had always known, a woman who executed her decisions immediately once they were made. Clara heard the knock, heard Mary's voice, heard her mother's voice, which she had not heard in 4 months, and felt something turn over in her chest that was not pain exactly, but was adjacent to it, the particular ache of a love that has been strained by difficult circumstances and not broken. Her mother was 53, and looked in that moment both older and more herself than Clara remembered. Upright, composed, the kind of woman who had been practical her whole life, not because she enjoyed it, but because it had been required of her, and she had met the requirement without complaint. She looked at Clara for a long moment. You look different, her mother said. I am different, Clara said. Good different or difficult different? Both, Clara said. Can't it be both? Something moved across her mother's face, a recognition, a softness, and then she opened her arms the way she had done when Clara was a child, and Clara walked into them without thinking about it, and felt for the first time in 4 months something she had not let herself feel, because feeling it would have cost too much while she was fighting. She felt held. "I'm sorry," her mother said quietly into her hair. "I should not have those letters. The ones about being practical. I knew even as I wrote them that I was asking you to carry something I should have been carrying with you." "You were afraid," Clara said. "I was terrified," her mother said. "But that was mine to manage, not yours to solve." They stood there for a moment, just a moment, because both of them were women who stood up, and standing still was a temporary condition between one forward motion and the next. Then her mother pulled back and looked at her with clear, direct eyes. "Tell me about him." Nathaniel arrived for dinner. This had not been planned. Clara had sent a note to the society offices where he was meeting with the board, and he had come promptly, correctly dressed, hat in hand, and had met Mrs. Whitcomb in Mary's parlor, with the particular Whittaker composure that Clara had once mistaken for coldness, and now recognized as respect. Her mother looked at him the way mothers look at men who have done things for their daughters, with an assessment so comprehensive it covered the whole room in approximately 4 seconds. "Mr. Whittaker," her mother said, "my daughter tells me you have an east wing drainage problem." Nathaniel blinked, recovered in approximately 1 second. Had he said, "It's resolved"? "She told me that too," her mother said. "She also told me you corrected her about a historical placard, and that she corrected you back, and that you said the word fair and moved on." She studied him. "Do you do that often? Admit you're wrong." "When I am wrong," Nathaniel said, "which is not as rarely as I would prefer." Something shifted in Mrs. Whitcomb's expression. Not approval exactly, something more considered than that. Recognition, maybe. The look of a woman who has spent 30 years navigating men who couldn't say the word fair and has just met one who can. "Sit down, Mr. Whittaker," she said. "Tell me about the Hudson Valley." He sat down. He told her. And Clara watched her mother listen, really listen, the way she listened when something mattered, and felt the last knot in her chest loosen and come free. He proposed on a Wednesday evening in the 3rd week of August, not at a dinner, not at a social occasion, not with an audience of any kind. He came to Mary's house and asked Clara to walk with him, and she went, and they walked to the harbor. Because of course they did, because the harbor was where the real things happened between them. And when they stopped, he turned to face her and was quiet for a moment with the particular stillness that she had learned to read as something important is about to be said. "I am not good at this," he said. "You are better than you think," she said. "I have a speech prepared," he said. "I wrote it 4 times. It is thorough. It covers the estate, the financial arrangements, the Cambridge position, and how it would practically—" "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes. Don't give the speech." He looked at her. "Just say the true thing," she said, "the way you always do." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have been alone for a long time, and I did not know how alone until the moment you told me the truth in a doorway, and I understood that the absence of that of someone who simply says the true thing without calculation had been costing me something I couldn't name." He held her gaze without apology. "I would like to stop paying that cost. I would like to spend the rest of my life in proximity to your particular kind of honesty, and build something with you that belongs to both of us equally." A pause. "That is the true thing." Clara looked at him in the summer evening air, with Boston moving around them, and the harbor doing what harbors do, receiving and releasing, and felt the full weight of everything that had brought her to this moment. A wrong carriage, a woman in green silk with a plan, a placard with the wrong date, 7 letters in a cedar box, a teaching position that was hers, a mother who had come to Boston and said I should have carried this with you. "Yes," she said, "that is the true thing." Is that a yes to the question I haven't technically asked yet? It is a yes to everything you meant when you said it, she said. Which is the same thing. He took her hand. Not dramatically, just took it, held it the way you hold something that belongs with you. I did have a ring in my coat pocket, he said, in case you're wondering. I wasn't wondering, she said, but show me anyway. They married in October, 3 weeks after Clara's first class at Cambridge. She kept the position. This had not been a negotiation, because Nathaniel had never suggested it be otherwise, had in fact told the Hudson Valley estate manager in August that the household would need to accommodate a schedule centered around Cambridge's academic calendar, as his wife would be teaching composition and rhetoric to young women, and he considered the work essential. The estate manager had blinked. Nathaniel had looked at him with that flat, certain expression. The schedule had been accommodated. Eleanor cried at the wedding. She did it with great composure and absolute conviction, and afterward denied it entirely, and Clara loved her for both things. Mrs. Whitcomb stood in the front row, and was the still upright, dry-eyed figure of maternal dignity until the moment Nathaniel said, I would like to spend the rest of my life in proximity to your particular kind of honesty, because Clara had told him that was the truest thing anyone had said to her, and he had put it in the vows without telling her. And when it landed, her mother pressed one hand briefly to her mouth and composed herself in approximately 4 seconds, and that was all. Clara saw it. She held it like the cedar box, like the harbor, like all the things that were real and hers and permanent. That first winter at the Hudson Valley, Clara taught her Cambridge students on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She rode back on Friday evenings, and Nathaniel met her carriage every Friday without being asked, because he was a man who had learned what absence cost and had no intention of being careless about presence. On Saturday mornings, they went to the library together. His handwriting was in the margins of half the books, small, precise, occasionally arguing with the author in terms that made her laugh out loud. She started adding her own notes beside his. Not agreeing, not always. Pushing back on 2 things, conceding 1, marking passages that connected to other things he hadn't read yet. He found the first one on a Saturday in December. Stood in the library with the book open, reading her margin note, going very still. You wrote in my book, he said. You wrote in it first, she said. That's different. It's my book. It's our library, she said. He looked at her across the room with those direct, serious eyes, and the warmth that had always been in him. The real warmth, the one under the reserve, was entirely present, entirely unguarded, entirely hers. Yes, he said. It is. Clara Whitcomb. Whitaker had run from the wrong man and walked into the wrong carriage and told the truth before she had any reason to. And she had built, not been given, not been rescued into, but built a life so fully her own that the word practical had lost its power over her entirely. She had chosen clearly, been chosen in return, and never once looked back.